Hello and welcome to Comedy in a Nutshell, a podcast in which some of the best and brightest in the world of comedy talk about their experiences, challenges and triumphs. I'm your host, Mark Decano, a man who's spent decades enjoying live comedy, and what I don't know about comedy, well, I'm sure we'll find out. I love talking to people in comedy about comedy, and if you like to hear what they have to say as much as I do, then please like, subscribe, rate, review and share the podcast. Thank you. There are few people in and around the world of comedy as much as today's guest who aren't themselves comedians, but with 30 years dedicated to the inception and leadership of Europe's largest comedy festival, he's more qualified to talk about comedy than most. It's comedy champion and erstwhile director of the Leicester Comedy Festival, Geoff Rowe. Hi, Geoff. Good morning.
Hello.
So if you're happy, we'll crack on.
Yeah.
So before we get into the detail of the Leicester Comedy Festival and its birth, where was comedy when you were growing up? Was it part of your life?
Not really. No. I mean, I remember watching, I always get it the wrong way around, either Friday Night Live or Saturday Night Live. The thing with Ben Elton.
Yes. It was Saturday Night Live in America, Friday Night Live here, and then they changed it to Saturdays. That's right.
That's right. So it was Friday Night Live. So I remember watching that as a sort of, I don't know how old I was. I suppose a teenager. I suppose. And I remember Comic Relief starting, and but I didn't really grow up in a arty family, or a family that, we probably went to the pantomime once a year. My parents didn't listen to music particularly. We didn't go out, to the theatre and things. But if I'm honest, when I was 13, I promoted my first music gig. Because my friends and I were really bored where we were living and there was nothing to do, so I thought I'd put on a gig. So I suppose throughout my teenage years, music was my thing, really, more than comedy. And when I came to Leicester, I did so I moved to Leicester in 1991, I think it was, and I then did start to see some comedy. I remember seeing Linda Smith at the Old Phoenix Arts Centre, and I saw Lee Evans at the Old Phoenix. And I think there was a comedy network club night at the Student Union, which I worked behind the bar at the Student Union, so I would have seen stuff there. But no, it wasn't like I was, growing up a massive comedy fan. No, is the short answer to your question.
Yeah. That's interesting when you talk about being a teenager, wanting to promote rather than perform. Most teenagers want to be in a band.
Well, I did perform. I don't often admit to it, but I was Joseph in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. So I did perform, but then, and I think this is honestly what happened. I've got pretty terrible eyesight, and when I was about 10 or 11, I think, I had an eye test, and they discovered that I couldn't see very much. And so I started to wear glasses. When I started to wear glasses, being on stage was a terrifying thing because I could suddenly see people. Before I couldn't see anything. So I think I was sort of more fearless, I suppose. But as soon as I started to wear glasses, I could see the audience. And that made me really terrified. So I stopped performing. And I did play the piano badly. And I did play the guitar even more badly. So no, I wasn't destined to be on the stage. That was something I learned quite quickly. It wasn't going to happen.
So when you went into university or towards the end of this is a course that I can't believe even existed at the time. And even today, to be honest, it was arts administration. Is that right?
Yeah. So I have a degree. I have a BA honours degree in performing arts, open brackets, arts administration, close brackets. So you could choose whether you specialised in art I mean, arts admin is a terrible name for what we did. Arts admin, music, drama, or dance.
Right.
Well, we've already established I'm certainly not a musician and I'm not an actor. And unless I've had lots to drink, I'm not a dancer either. So yeah, that's what my degree is in.
Mm.
It's now called something. It's called something better now, like festivals and arts management or something like that.
Right.
That sounds a lot more credible than arts administration.
Sounds less spreadsheety and more
Yeah,
sort
exactly.
of managerial. Yeah.
Exactly.
Explain to me then what came out of that and how did the festival start?
So the course in those days, I
Mm.
was doing a degree at a thing called Leicester Polytechnic, which no longer exists because it became De Montfort University.
Right.
But I guess because it was a polytechnic degree, it was very practical. You know, we did loads of placements and
Yeah.
I think it was probably called work experience, free labour for companies
Yeah.
who accepted students. But it was brilliant. I met loads of people who kind of did what I wanted to do as a job.
Right.
And in the last term of our second year, our lecturers came to us and said, in your final year, you have to put on a practical project.
Yeah.
That was in 1993. And as we've already established, I and a lot of the other people on the course were big music fans.
Mm-hmm.
We read NME every week. It was our Bible,
Yes.
New Musical Express.
Yeah.
And they were talking about stand up. They famously had Rob Newman and David Deal on the cover. And
Yes.
that caused a bit of an outcry at the time because NME was a music magazine.
Yeah.
What are you doing putting these comedians on? I mean, it sounds weird now, but that's how I remember it.
Was it an ME that coined the phrase comedy is the new rock and roll?
Yeah,
With Newman and Baddiel, because that was 93, wasn't it?
yeah, I believe so. Yeah, so they started to they were talking about Sean Hughes. I remember Sean Hughes being talked about quite a lot.
Right.
And so somebody said, and it wasn't me, but somebody in our group at university said, well, why don't we put on a comedy festival?
Mm.
And we didn't know any comedians. We'd not really seen, I mean, I'd seen a few, but it wasn't like we were big comedy experts or anything.
Right.
And it sounded really cool and exciting, and it sounded like, well, why not?
Yeah.
So we said yes, we were going to put on a Leicester's first comedy festival, and that happened in February '94 was the first one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Someone just suggesting it. Was there once the idea was planted in their head, was there anything that sort of inspired you further apart from Newman and Baddiel? Was there any sort of thing? Obviously, you said you didn't have the connections. So how did you think that was something you could pick up and run with?
Well, I suppose we got an awful lot of support from so the course had a very, very close link with the old Phoenix Arts Centre in Leicester.
Right.
And the director at the time was a guy called Richard Haswell, and he'd started around about the same time as we decided to do a comedy festival.
Right.
And he'd worked in Bury at a venue called the Met,
mm-hmm.
which before he came to Leicester, and that had a massive comedy reputation. So he certainly knew more than we did about comedy.
Right.
And then the guy who ran the Y Theatre at the time, a guy called Ian Stevens, he knew a bit about comedy because the Y was hosting a regular comedy club called And Why Not?
Okay.
In those days,
mm-hmm.
with a promoter called Nicola Ward. And so we formed this, I think it was probably called our advisory board, and those people were on it. And people thought it was a really good idea. I mean, the city council thought it was a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
The university thought it was. The local newspaper thought it was. And I'd lived in London for a year before I came to Leicester, working with a band, with
mm-hmm.
a music band. And there was a couple of people who were involved in the band who'd started to do comedy on television.
Right.
One woman in particular called Sandy. And so she was sort of, very vaguely, really working in comedy. So I rang Sandy up and said, tell me everything I need to know about live comedy. And one of the things she told me was, you need to come down to London to a comedy club called the Red Rose Comedy Club, which was on Seven Sisters Road in Finsbury Park, if anybody knows it. And so we all went down. She got us free tickets, and we saw the Rubber Bishops, which was Bill Bailey's double act, and whoever else was on. I can't remember who else was on, but so we sort of. But I think we sort of put the bones of the festival together. But I think I was always really, I suppose, I was excited about the idea of doing a festival as I was about doing the comedy bit.
Right.
So the idea of putting on, and I think that is one thing that I've tried to do over the years, is to try and make it festive and exciting.
Yeah.
It isn't just a collection of shows that would normally happen. It's somehow bigger than that.
Yeah.
So I was excited about the comedy bit, don't get me wrong, but I was also excited about the idea of putting on a festival. And so that kind of got us excited. And so we talked to a few people, and then when we got patrons very early on, somebody, I don't know whether it was me or somebody else, but somebody decided that because nobody knew who we were in those days, you would fax a lot of people. You would send faxes. And so we had a letterhead, and we knew, I mean, this sounds ridiculous, I do understand that, but we knew that when we sent a fax, the fax would come out of your fax machine with the logo at the top. And it would just be Leicester Comedy Festival, and people wouldn't have no idea what that was. But if underneath the logo it said we had Norman Wisdom and Tony Slattery as our patrons, that might make people go, oh, that's interesting, and read it. Yeah. So we got Norman Wisdom and Tony Slattery to be the patrons of the festival, and then we just started putting it together, I suppose.
I'm fascinated by that conversation. How do you talk to Norman Wisdom and Tony Slattery and say, hey, this festival that basically doesn't exist, would you patronize it?
Well, of course, this was 93. We had yet to discover the internet. So we wanted the festival to be as diverse as possible. We were a bunch of students reading the NME. I think the general perception was that the festival would be for young students. It would be probably rude, full of alcohol, late night, the typical stereotypical comedy view. So we didn't want the festival just to be about that. We wanted it to be more diverse than that. So Norman Wisdom, we thought would be a great person to invite to be a festival patron. And I went to the university library, and there were directories on the shelves of artists and performers. And you could look up Norman Wisdom, and his manager was a guy called Johnny Manns with his address. And I wrote a letter to Norman Wisdom, and he replied and said, thank you very much for asking me to be a patron of your festival. I'd love to be. Which was kind of weird. I mean, it's extraordinary, really, that would happen. And then Tony Slattery, when I lived in London for a year with the band, before I came to Leicester, one of the band members, one of the things Jim used to say quite a lot was, it was really weird, because when he would put his milk bottles out at night and the rubbish, he would turn to the side, and Tony Slattery would be doing the same thing, because he lived next door to Jim. So I knew Jim's address, and therefore I knew Tony Slattery's address. So I wrote, and Tony Slattery, well, I think people forget, he was so famous in 1993. Yes. He was mega famous. And he didn't write back, but he did ring my student house, and my student friend, Sal, answered the phone and shouted upstairs and said, it's the phone. And I said, who is it? And she said, he says it's Tony Slattery, but that's a bit weird, Tony Slattery. I mean, it would be like Michael McIntyre or Peter Kay or somebody phoning up a student house. And then we went down to London and we met Tony. We got unbelievably drunk. And then he said he'd be a patron of the festival. I mean, there was a lot of people sometimes say, oh, you clearly had a vision and a clear idea of what you were doing. We had no idea what we were doing. We just sort of made it up as we went along. But the patrons things, they were very helpful to us.
Yeah. Saying you didn't have a clear idea what you were doing, but you must have had a vision for the outcome of what you wanted to achieve, because you said there that you didn't want it just to be a student-y a drunken, bawdy event. I'm assuming for the purpose of the first festival, you didn't predict repeated outings of it. You were looking for that one that you had directly in front of you. So what did you envision for that festival?
Yeah. I mean, we didn't. There was no sense whatsoever that it would carry on. It was a student thing. We were going to do it in our final year. It's part of our academic studies, and then we'd all move on and get proper jobs.
Yeah.
I think it sounds a bit of a cliche, but it's true. I think my mantra with the festival has nearly always been everybody laughs at something. It doesn't matter how old you are, what your background is, where you're from, anything. Everybody laughs at something. And our job is to cram as many of those things into 19 days as possible and call it Leicester Comedy Festival. So if you start from that premise, some of the non-stand-uppy things that we've done over the years become obvious, I suppose, until a few years ago, when my grandmother passed away, my parents, my nieces and nephews would all come to something in Leicester Comedy Festival because they could find something that was attractive to them. And so this idea that it was a sort of celebration of British comedy emerged, and I quite like that as a sort of thing, I suppose. So but it was, and also, somebody pointed out to me this year in the festival, which was our 30th anniversary, that the other reason we did this, and it's really obvious, was to get funding. The Arts Council gave us funding in the first few years, and the City Council gave us funding in the first few years. They wouldn't have done that if it had just been stand-up.
Right.
They in those early, it's changed a little bit since then. City Council's money doesn't have many strings attached to it, and the Arts Council don't fund us anymore. So, but it was partly to try and get grants, and it was also partly because I think we believed in it. I think we thought that thing about everybody laughing at something and our job is to cram as many of those things as possible into the festival was important to us. We didn't just do it for money.
Yeah. So you mentioned there, this has been the 30th anniversary, 30 years of the Leicester Comedy Festival. And you said about it being more than just stand-up. So what are some of the things that make Leicester Comedy Festival unique among festivals? What's its USP?
There's a sister kids festival called the UK Kids Comedy Festival, which we set up 5 years ago.
Yes.
On a bit of a whim, really. When I say we, I think I decided, that'd be a good idea. Let's do that.
Yeah.
And I think it's gaining momentum every year, and it's something I think I'm really proud of. There's things like the UK Pun Championships, so sort of. We sometimes internally, traditionally, we called them special events, but we had to be really careful who we admitted that to, because that implies that the other things are not special. And then we get into trouble from the media and saying, well, am I not special enough then? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we do the gala show, we do the Punch Ups, we do the Leicester Mercury Comedian of the Year, we do Silver Stand Up.
Yeah.
We do a thing called Beyond a Joke, which is a series of panel discussions about different topics and comedy. I think now it's sort of it's kind of got an open access feel to it, like the Fringe does. So no one person books everything. That would be madness. And the fact that new and emerging comedians come and shock horror get audiences is, I think, kind of makes it distinctive. That was never the case when we first started doing that. I mean, in the first few years, we couldn't have anybody on at the festival that hadn't been on TV or radio, because no one would go and see them.
Right.
But now I think there is a real audience for people, and the awards process helps with that, because people get nominated, and so I think we have managed to evolve and develop the festival into something now that, well, I mean, I'm standing back, so I don't have to worry about the future. But hopefully, will continue to be relevant, and comedians travel from all over the UK, if not further afield, and audiences do. And I think there's a real sense of excitement, and it isn't the Edinburgh Fringe, and it never will be, and it was never supposed to be. But it feels a bit more like that than some other festivals. That's only because of the scale of it,
right?
That's why it feels like that.
Yeah. So after 30 years, and as you say, you're sort of stepping back now. Naturally, you'll have looked back in your mind over the last 30 years. What standout points have there been? What individual moments have really struck you about being a part of the festival, if not being the festival?
Well, I guess you want me to focus on positive standout moments rather than negative standout moments.
Well, I'm assuming the positive ones were the ones that sprang to mind.
Well, not necessarily.
Although if a nightmare just flashed through your memory, I'd be fascinated to hear what it was.
Well, we've made mistakes over the years. We've lost a lot of money over the years. That's no secret. It's always managed to work itself out in the end. But I kind of those kind of. I mean, by far. So I'll just talk a little bit about the low points. I mean, by far, the lowest points have always been about money.
Sure.
Sitting. Lots of people will recognise this. Sitting on a door of a comedy show, and you've not got enough people in to cover the bills, and all you're doing is sitting there going, "I've just lost 100, 200, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 pounds." Is a really depressing. Miserable thing to do. So I think standout moments. I think when we started to do the gala preview show, which we now do at Dwanfor Hall, that was a real moment of oh my god, there's like 1,500 people really like the festival, at least, and they'll come and they'll pay money to come and see a lineup that they probably don't even know who's on because we haven't told them, but. That was a thing. I mean, in terms of shows, I remember seeing Sarah Millican's first hour-long show. I remember seeing Johnny Vegas win the Leicester Mercury Comedian of the Year. That was an insanely wonderful night. I remember seeing Jason Manford's first hour-long show at an old venue on Welford Road in Leicester, which no longer exists. I think from an entirely selfish point of view, one of the things that I started doing years ago was interviewing comedians on stage before podcasts were even a thing. I think it is the moment where I do sort of, it's the closest I ever get to pinching myself. When I'm about to go on stage with Ramesh Ranganathan or Joe Brand or any of the people that I've interviewed, Jasper Carrott, Alexi Sale, I do sit there and go, this is just, how on earth did this happen? This student project, which was not supposed to continue. And here I am chatting to Alexi Sale and people are watching. It's a real, genuinely, it's a real like, oh my God moment. It's bonkers. I don't really understand how we got to that point. And yet clearly I've been involved. So I should have the answer to that. But I know I'm rambling, but there's 30 years to kind of think about. But and also some of the community projects that we've done. When we go into schools or community groups or whatever, and they get involved in the. So it's the whole thing, really. It's the breadth of the festival is a thing that I reflect on over and over and over again, is why on earth are the NHS involved in our festivals, the Diocese of Leicester, schools, the shopping centre in Leicester. It's a weird mixture of people who've joined the festival community, and I'm really proud of that.
Yeah. You talked there about interviewing comedians. Is that something that you'd like to continue doing?
Yeah, I mean, of course it is. I'd love to. I've been really lucky because the last few years I've been asked to sort of do them in Leicester and then also do them at a festival that you will have never heard of called Glastonbury Festival. So I interviewed Pam Ayres in Leicester and Glastonbury and Joe Brand. at Leicester and Glastonbury. So yeah, I mean, I absolutely love them. I love doing it. And if I could do more of them in Leicester or Glastonbury, or if there's any other festival directors listening, I'm very available. Um, yeah, I'd love to do more of them. And I think what I like, what you're doing with this podcast is great. But what I love about the interviews that I do is that they're not recorded and they're not for podcasts. They're just, I know I sound like I'm an old git, but they're in the moment. And if you're not there, you don't get to hear them. And I love that. And I think the comedians like it as well because they can be completely unguarded about what they say.
Yes.
Because it's not going to go up online.
Yeah. Plus, they have an audience to perform to.
Yeah.
So that always brings them out more, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's true.
So I've been a volunteer at Leicester Comedy Festival for 4 years now, during which time I've seen about 250 shows.
Wow.
In those 4 years. During your time with the festival, did you still avidly go and see as many shows as you could? Did you see any shows? Did you have to be apart and aside from it?
In the festival in Leicester, you mean?
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's been a bit different over the last couple of years since I sort of decided to leave, I suppose. But before that, no. I mean, I didn't see hardly anything. I mean, I can absolutely remember not seeing anything all the way through. I would pop in and I'd enjoy it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd like to see some shows all the way through, but also I enjoyed going from venue to venue to venue and checking in inverted commas that everything was okay. And, in reality, I probably didn't have to do that, but showing my face to people, saying hello to comedians and promoters and other people. I think I said earlier on, I like the buzziness of festivals.
Yeah.
And it will be very weird not working on Leicester Comedy Festival, which I assume for the foreseeable future will be in my home city. I'll have to get that buzz from somewhere else because I won't be able to. I'm not going to work on it anymore, so I won't be able to do what I used to do. But so no, saw hardly anything. I mean, people who volunteer for the festival. I mean, that's 250 shows in 4 years is ridiculous. I can't compete with that at all. I've been really lucky to be on the Edinburgh Comedy Awards panel a few times. I don't even think I saw that number in Edinburgh. Oh, maybe I did actually. Maybe I did. But no, never saw a lot really.
Yeah. With the advent of streaming services and all things technology, and of course in 2021 the festival was exclusively online. How did you feel about Leicester going global?
I think if we, before COVID,
yes,
I think within live comedy world, there was quite a lot of negativity about videoing and streaming things.
Yes.
I mean, I remember, because I've been doing it for so long, but I remember when people were really sniffy if Act sent a link to YouTube to show a producer or a promoter a show that they'd done in order to get work. And it was like, but I have to see you live. I can't possibly watch it on YouTube. I mean, that was a real thing for a long time was some people would book shows that they saw on YouTube, but a lot of people wouldn't. Excuse me. So, the other thing is I've always been adamant that Leicester Comedy Festival should be a live festival. There are other festivals, which maybe I won't name, but there are other festivals which are they're produced for TV and they have an audience, a live audience there, but actually it's produced for television.
Right.
And I'm not a fan of those. I hate them because you have to keep stopping and retaking things, and there's cameras everywhere and all that. So I wanted Leicester Comedy Festival to be a live festival. And then COVID happened, and then we had no choice really but to start streaming things because everybody else started doing it, and then it suddenly seemed to be okay to do that. Nobody was sniffy about it. And I'm not of a age or generation I don't really watch a lot of stuff online. So for me personally, um, the idea of watching comedy online, even now, live comedy I'm talking about,
Yes.
even now is like, I can't remember the last time I sat at home one evening and thought, oh, I know, I'll go onto one of the streaming platforms and watch a show.
Yeah.
However, all of that, it was really cool that the festival in 21 happened online, and suddenly our audience was global.
Yeah.
And did you remember that? Do you remember that guy from New Zealand who used to watch stuff in 21? There was one guy, and he would watch it on online. I can't, and he'd be walking around Wellington Harbour in New Zealand in the beautiful sunshine, and we would be sat in Leicester or wherever we were, freezing cold. And this chap was kind of, it was really odd. But he was on lots of shows. He watched a lot of shows, and we could see him, and and all that. It was on Zoom, I suppose it was. But so I think I can, and I completely also understand that for some people it makes the festival much more accessible because maybe they can't get to shows, maybe they can't. I think Leicester is a pretty affordable festival to come to, but if you can't afford to take time off work or stay in a hotel or whatever, stay with mates or whatever, then you can enjoy it at home.
Yeah.
It's a good thing, I think, but it's not a patch on, I don't think, personally, on the live festival.
Yeah.
But I do also understand, as I say, I'm old, and therefore, young people, younger people than me want to experience stuff online, don't they?
Yeah. So after 30 years, now that you're stepping back, obviously you've got quite the legacy to leave behind. What is it that satisfies you at this point, letting go or being in a position to let go the reins?
Well, I think, I've not been directly responsible at all, really, for appointing the people who are taking over.
Right.
But I know, I did say this to somebody the other day. There are sort of two people taking over from me, at which point the person said, oh, so what you're saying, Geoff, is you were doing two people's jobs when you were at the festival, which I suppose in some ways I was, but there are two people taking it on, I suppose, as the senior management team, and they're brilliant. They're brilliant people, and so that is genuinely satisfying because I think they and the rest of the team will come up with their own ideas and will take it in their own direction and where they want it to be, and that's right and proper. They can't just replicate what Geoff would have done for another 30 years because that's not right, and maybe it needs to go in a direction that I wouldn't like or choose, the online thing, for example. So I think you used the word satisfied. I am satisfied that it is in safe hands. That hasn't always been the case, but it is now, and I think that is satisfying.
Yeah.
And I think also the other thing that happened during COVID, during lockdown, was I would be sat in this office at home, tapping away on my laptop.
Yeah.
And when it first started, but also as time went on, I did sit here and think to myself, I don't know whether anybody cares about Leicester Comedy Festival. I mean, I know people tell me they do, but when things were so bleak in terms of COVID and life looked so awful, really? You're telling me that a comedy festival in Leicester is, uppermost in people's minds? And then what happened was people started to tell me that it was important, and all sorts of people, famous comedians, other people, the industry, the community, would contact me and go, and they'd either say, you are going to keep doing it, aren't you? Or nearly every single person would say, is there anything I can do to help?
Yeah.
So obviously, if they were famous, well-known comedians, the answer is yes, you could do a benefit show for us, or you could do a Q&A online and we could show it and sell tickets for it. And, so the other thing that is satisfying, which I honestly think 5 years ago wouldn't have been the case. Is I think absolutely people see a value in Leicester Comedy Festival and think it's important. It's not the most important thing in the world. Health and happiness and stuff is important.
Yeah.
But I think what I now reflect on is the fact that, can I swear?
Yeah. Knock yourself out.
People give a shit.
Yeah.
People give a shit about it, and I think that gave me kind of confidence, I suppose, that I could go. That's all to do with leaving it in safe hands, I suppose. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And in fact,
Okay,
what you were saying there about people giving a shit, I've spoken to comedians, and I spoke to a comedian last night, in fact, about this on this subject, about whether people give a damn about any festival. And I think the consensus that I've received is that Edinburgh, it is an arts festival. It includes a lot of comedy. It's the biggest festival in the world, arts festival in the world. The industry is there. So the comedians go to Edinburgh because you kind of have to, because that's where the industry is. But the festival that they want to go to, the festival that they enjoy doing, is the Leicester Festival. So if that's what the comedians are saying, there's definitely a lot to be said for it. That's the comedians' festival.
Yeah. I think so. I find it really hard. I've said this to people before. I find it really hard to reflect on that, because it's been part of my. It's been the most important. It's been the most dominant thing in my life for 30 years.
Yeah.
So measuring, I can be proud and satisfied of the scale of it. I can be proud and satisfied of, the people who take it on, all of that.
Yeah.
But figuring out the sort of the scale of it and the impact is I'm not being modest about it. It's genuinely difficult for me to figure it out, because it's just what I've done, Mark. I've just done this thing for so long.
Yeah.
And when, people like you say what you've just said, and other people say nice things about it and everything, it's just weird.
Yeah.
Because the student project that I set up with other people in 1994 is still going, and it's just odd. I find it very strange.
Yeah. Yeah. So the awards then in 2023, lifetime contribution to Leicester Comedy Festival. I mean, it couldn't be put any other way, could it, really?
Well,
it's not a complete lifetime yet. I'm sure you will be getting phone call after phone call in the coming years, but a rightly deserved standing ovation. How did you feel when your name was called out? You have to have expected it, surely.
No, I didn't. The complete opposite. I didn't. Normally at those things, I know everything that's going to happen, because I'm the director of the festival, and we have meetings and we plan it. And I know, members of the awards panel don't know who've won, probably, I hope, but I do. I know who all the winners are, and I've planned it all. This year, because I was leaving. I thought I knew two winners. I knew the Legend of Comedy winner.
Yeah.
And I was involved in a conversation where the team were talking about who was going to win the Lifetime Contribution Award. And no, I didn't know at all. And then I sat there, and Charlotte, the new festivals and program director, got up and started talking about me. And I mean, it didn't take me very long to realise what on earth was going on. But it was very nice, and it was a very odd week, because I had that on the Monday. Oh, I had I had a lunch with the team on the Friday. Monday night was the awards thing.
Yeah.
Wednesday night, I did a show. I didn't perform in a show, but I booked a show, a leaving show for friends and stuff.
Yeah.
And that was great. And there was a few other things about my leaving do. So I did have some people said I had a longer leaving do than Elton John, but but it was lovely. I mean, I've won a few awards in my time, and I got a medal from the Queen. I got all, and I'm not saying these things to show off, but they are really nice
Yeah.
things to happen.
Yeah.
I don't really care about the honours system and all of that, but when you get a letter from Buckingham Palace to your letterbox,
Yeah.
and it says the Queen wants to give you a British Empire Medal, and when you come to Buckingham Palace, the only way I can describe it is it's really nice. And the Lifetime Contribution Award from Leicester Comedy Festival was just a lovely way for the team to, I suppose, say thank you.
Yeah.
All of you lot in the audience got up and stood up. I mean, it's really nice.
Yeah.
And I was very grateful for it.
So, what now? What's next for you?
I genuinely don't know. The reason why I left was because, and it still feels a bit weird saying I've left because I've been saying I'm leaving for such a long time, but I always felt like I wanted to do something else, and I promised myself and my partner that I wouldn't do it forever, and it feels like 30 years is forever. And the safe hands thing is important. You know, I didn't want to leave it when it was going to fall over, because I think it's good enough to survive. So therefore, if you want to do something different, normally most people would have a burning desire to become a gardener or a plumber or a carpenter or a potter or something else. I don't have any burning desire to do anything else at all at the moment. So I need to figure out what I'm going to do. I suspect I'll probably do some more comedy-related things, partly because that's who I know. And that's the world that I know of. But if anybody listening to this or you know of how do you suddenly reinvent yourself when you're 51, having done something for 30 years, and come up with an alternative when you have no idea what that's going to be? Please tell me, because I kind of figure there's something else out there that I would enjoy and get satisfaction from. But I'll just wait and see. I'm not going to set up another festival. That's what I'm not.
No, music festival?
Well, there may be a music festival. A couple of people have asked me, am I going to go and work for Nottingham Comedy Festival? I think that's highly unlikely. But no, something. I would like to do something which is less all-consuming. Doing the festival has been brilliant for 30 years. Don't get me wrong. I've loved a lot of it. I haven't loved all of it, but I've loved a lot of it. But it has, in my head, it's been there for all the time. And the best thing about the last year or so since I decided to go and since I told people I was going is I don't think about it 24 hours a day. And that is nice. To think about something else would be good.
So I spent 35 years in the retail industry, and at 50 last year I retired and decided to reinvent myself. So I started a podcast. So will there be a Geoff Rowe's Comedy Memories podcast on the horizon, perhaps, or a book in the works?
Well, people keep asking me about a book. I just A, I don't know whether I'm smart enough to write it, and B, although that doesn't stop Prince Harry.
Well, there you go.
But also, I'm not convinced there's a lot of people that would want to read it. So I don't know. It's only been, we're recording this on the 6th of April, so it's been 6 days since I've technically left. I'm going to allow myself slightly longer to maybe the 8th. Maybe the 8th of April, and then I'll force myself to decide. We'll see.
I've got a record of almost, and it's an incomplete list, but a record of almost every gig going back to when I saw Little and Large in 1979.
Wow.
And Basil Brush. I saw Basil Brush in 1979, and then I saw him at Edinburgh in 2019, 40 years later.
Wow.
I mean, I'm assuming it's not the same. But it's moments, it's memories like that. You might remember last week when I saw you, and I wanted to catch Arthur Smith before he left, and it wasn't about, I saw you at this and I saw you at that. It was about the moments, and that moment that at Cambridge in 2021 when there was an absolute downpour and we were in an amphitheatre, and he just invited the audience up onto the stage out of the rain. We all just sang Hallelujah. And it was just, I said, that's a moment in time that you could predict, you can't recapture.
Yeah.
And just sharing that was fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, I'd like that list sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't talk about it because I don't know whether it's just a pipe dream or not really, but if I could do one thing, if I won the lottery tomorrow, I would properly start to archive British comedy because no one's really doing it. And there are, I mean, the stuff Andy Hollingworth does with his photography stuff is amazing. And there is the Comedy Museum in London, and Ollie Double does bits in Kent. And so there are bits. But I think your list, other people have got lists. Other people have got boxes of tickets when tickets were a thing. And if I could do anything, I would somehow start to bring all this stuff together somewhere, probably digitally. But that's what I'd love to do, because I've got all sorts of shit in the festival archive and in our loft.
I imagine.
And I think it deserves to be preserved. Somehow.
Is there any worthy cause? Is there anything you want to say about the Leicester Festival?
Well, I have absolutely nothing to promote anymore, so it feels a bit peculiar.
Yet you have nothing yet.
Yet, that's true. You can, if you haven't, or I'm trying to find a copy of it, but I don't think I have one here. But you can, and it doesn't matter anyway because people can't see. But we published a book a couple of years ago called All Puns Blazing, which is a pun joke book, which a publisher called Penguin Books asked us to put together, and people can buy that and support the festival. I think people, maybe this is a good thing to end on. I don't know. I think people think Leicester Comedy Festival and the UK Kids Comedy Festival perhaps are bigger than they really are. I think people think, you talked about earlier on about people's perception of Edinburgh and people's perception of Leicester. And I would argue Edinburgh is in a similar position to us, really, in that the only reason Leicester Comedy Festival keeps going is because there's a real dedicated team of people at the heart of it. There's a real dedicated community of people around those people who support it, the awards panel, volunteers, sponsors, other people. It only carries on because people support it. And so it's run by a registered charity. It's not there to make a profit. And believe you me, it does not make a profit. I think people need to keep valuing it and supporting it, and in whatever way they can. So buy the joke book for somebody you like for Christmas or something, because the money will go to the festival. Buy tickets, donate money, like you have. Get up and volunteer and get involved, because if it wasn't for you and all the other people, it wouldn't happen. And I think that's always been the balancing act for me. You want it to be national, high profile, exciting, famous people. We're on the One Show, we're in the Guardian. Oh my God, look at this thing. Balancing that with the fact of, we're money, and we need to do stuff in order to generate money, and because people see one and not the other. So I think, I don't know whether that's a good way to end or not, but keep supporting the festivals, and because they only happen because people do it. It's not, I think probably this, Amazon is probably the same. Social media, Twitter is owned the same. Whatever you think about what's his name who owns Twitter, he did buy it and he did keep it going. So I think often people get confused about the showbiz side of the festivals and how we know famous people, which is great. But we also need support. So support the festivals.
Fantastic. So in line with the title of the podcast, I'll ask my final question, which is, Geoff, please sum up comedy in a nutshell.
Well, it's how I've earned a kind of living for 30 years. That's true. I think comedy is the best way for people to burst bubbles, whether that's controversials and inverted commas, topics, uncomfortable topics, authority, each other. I think that's probably what I would say is comedy is about exposing the absurdity of life and us and other people, and just sort of reducing it. I don't say that lightly, reducing it to laughter.
Yeah.
And just go, it's just we can laugh at everything, and then we can cope with things a bit better. And so I think I'd say that that's not quite in a nutshell, but that's as brief as I'm going to be.
Oh, fantastic, Geoff! It's been brilliant talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking me on. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.